This is my first video to go on YouTube. I made my first video ever in my life yesterday. I went up to BitChute. Yeah, this one's going to go there as well. This one's also going to go onto YouTube. I thought about making a video for an introduction to the channel. And then I decided against it, and I thought I would just say a few words here right now and then go into the subject that is on the screen. What I'm going to be talking about today. This is something I've been wanting to do for years. It's really just a hobby. We'll see what it turns into. Maybe it turns into something, maybe it doesn't. I don't really care. I've followed a lot of different topics for many years. And I've just really wanted to put my 2 cents out into the ether there for a long time. And I've finally gotten around to doing it. I might get 3 people that listen. I might get 300. I might get 3,000. One day I might get 3 million. I have no idea, and like I said, I don't really care. This is just it's cathartic for me. But anyway, enough on that. I don't want the video to go on forever, and it's probably going to be long enough for what I want to cover, because I definitely don't want to make overly long content. I know from consuming so much content that after a while it starts to lose interest if you make it too long. So basically, this channel's not going to have a theme. I'm going to talk about whatever I wish. But to give an idea to the listener, to anybody that would subscribe, and it'll, you know, as I start to put up videos, it will become quite obvious. I don't know. I can't really fit into any box. But more or less, you know, to get as close as I can, I guess, you know, I would pertain to something of along the lines of what is known as the truther community today. I make no bones about it. I'm actually very content in my viewpoints, in my politics, my spirituality. I would say that I'm a Christian conservative and probably quite far right. But then again, on many of the so-called normie points, what is being called today, very commonly, I don't see eye to eye at all. And many would maybe call me a radical or a conspiracy theorist. But we all know what that means nowadays. Usually just means you're onto something. So, whatever. I'll be talking about everything from what you see on the screen to maybe biblical evidence. This is not going to be a biblically based channel, but it's very central to my world viewpoint. It's inevitable that it's going to come up in my analysis and sharing my thoughts on different topics that I want to speak on. So anyway, I think that's probably enough on that. I had a script. I did make this video once already. And it was about a 15-minute video that I had completely scripted, and by the time it was done, I wasn't happy with it, and I really felt that actually the script reading is kind of stressful. It's kind of counterintuitive. Thought it would help me really organize my thoughts and whatnot, and we'll see how this comes off. But I thought I could do a better job just kind of speaking off the cuff and speaking from the heart now that I've got it basically organized of what I want to talk about and how I want to go about it. Could be a little convoluted, but this is going to be just an introduction. The subject matter that you see up on the screen is, you know, it's a huge subject. I mean, it could be, you know, hundreds of hours of videos, and, you know, anybody that would be inclined to listen to my content, it's probably on their radar. They know what I'm referring to. And it's something that, you know, making this video here right now on 17th of February, 2023, you know, we're in the Tate era. We're in the mainstreaming of the manosphere, so to speak. Feminism is very much on my mind these days, and when I say feminism, I guess I'm really talking about the dynamic between men and women of today, and how completely different it is compared to any other time in all of history, and what the accepted narratives are, what the understood narratives are, what our roles are, all of that. It's been something that I like millions and millions of other people, and I think mostly men, but that's starting to change as well. That for most of my young life, up until 2008, 2009, none of this was on my radar at all. Then I, like a lot of people, a lot of men in particular, I had a series of events in my life that could be for maybe some other videos that made me to start to realize that a lot of the things, the dynamics that I had accepted as a young person, actually they weren't that way. And then incrementally I began to inform myself on alternative points of view, and that grew and grew and grew to a point now where I absolutely, completely, 100% am convinced, like it says on the screen there, that the narrative that is basically sold to us, and I don't think the vast majority of people are really aware of this, which is completely understandable. It's been done very slowly. It's been done very ingeniously, as though, and the quote unquote struggle for women's rights, it's really no different than all of these other struggles for quote unquote rights. They all follow this type of pattern or playbook where it seems, and it's taught to us through history, in public education, in documentaries, in movies, that these are organic happenings that have just come about as though we have evolved, so to speak. And I've come to understand that this is not the case at all. These things are completely engineered. As I said, it's done very well. There's truths in them without a doubt, but they're mixed with lies, they're mixed with obfuscations, they're mixed with half-truths, they're mixed with hiding facts, etc. If I had to choose in all of the ails that we suffer from today in the United States where I live, or in the Western world in general, and they are many, and these are all going to be subjects of videos of things to come. But right now, this is what I've got on my mind. This is what I've decided to start with. But if I had to choose one, just one, that I could address to try to make things more healthy or return to some kind of normalcy, this is the one that I would choose to address. And of course, when you start to talk about this issue, especially as a male, you're going to open yourself up, and that's completely fine. I've been hearing it for years. Come at me with all the arrows, all the slings. I could care less. I know what I'm about. It doesn't matter. People, and I understand too, because people just aren't informed. I've been at this for very long, and I freely admit, I'm over 50 years old now, and I often tell people that the 25-year-old me would be quite horrified at many of, or most, if not all, of what comes out of my mouth today, almost 30 years later. So I understand completely. But what I started to say was that when you start to address this, of course, it's, you're against women's rights. You must be a man-hater. You must be a misogynist, etc. I'm not talking about women at all. Women are not responsible for this. These are movements that have been put upon us. We've all been indoctrinated, and we've all accepted them to certain levels, and they've been woven into the fabric of society. It's not a matter of placing guilt or blame. It's a matter of analyzing the dynamics that are happening in our society, why they happened, what we can do about them. So I just wanted to state that from the outset, that's how I'm coming at this issue. But like I said, this introduction here that I'm going to follow up with presenting evidence. All I'm going to do here is just kind of put out my thesis, so to speak, on this certain plank of feminism, because there is so much, or however you want to call it. I've got to call it something. The dynamic between men and women. What is the power dichotomy? However you want to talk about it. I've got to have a term. I've got to have some way to talk about it. So we'll call it feminism. So let me get right to the point so the video doesn't go forever. Because myself, the process that I went through, now that I have been listening to, reading, watching discussions, debates on the matter, I find almost exclusively across the board, it's the conversation kind of starts in the middle and it's never really done justice. So I want to add kind of an aspect here that others have done before. When this first came on my radar years ago, there were people like Karen Strawn, a Canadian MRA, whose work greatly affected me here, and actually is a lot of the motivation for why I'm even making this video in the series that I'm going to follow it up with, of presenting historical evidence that really, really shows the solid proof to back up the statement that I have up here on the screen. And I've actually reached out to Karen a couple of days ago because I have saved a lot of information over the years. The exact information that I had in mind, I would have to wade through hours and hours of her old material to find it. Maybe she'll get back to me, maybe she won't. I have enough material besides that. There is heaps and heaps of material, but she had some very good particular pieces of evidence from the past of things that she has drummed up that really changed the whole perspective. Janice Fiomingo is another one that's done very good work on this. Paul Elam is another one, and there's many others. And they're all still around. They don't get, from my point of view anyway, they don't seem to get nearly as much play these days in the men's corner, or the people that talk about feminism or anti-feminism as they used to. It seems now has gone much more into the panel type of shows, Just Pearly Things, Fresh and Fit, Rich Cooper, which is fine. I'm not making a value assessment on one or the other. The point being is that I would like to kind of bring it up to the forefront again, some of the viewpoint that these people that I just named, the Janice Fiamingos, the Karen Straughns, the Paul Elams, that affected on me many years ago, and maybe kind of get it out there for some of these younger people, if they'll see it or not, I don't know. Some of the other ones, the newer generation, quote unquote, of people on the scene, because it's specifically them that when I watch them in these discussions. Now, sometimes, these discussions are literally debates between somebody that carries the feminist label, somebody that carries an anti-feminist label, but it usually doesn't go down that way. It's usually, men, sometimes some women, more and more women, but usually men that are, addressing dissatisfaction with the things that are going on today, and then women, kind of countering to that and maybe trying to find some middle ground. And pretty well without exception, you all listening, tell me if I'm wrong. I'll put it in the comments sections. We might have a discussion about it, and I'll readdress it. But this is what, and I was there too many years ago. And once again, this isn't a criticism. It's not a value assessment. It's just an assessment of what I see it's going along, and or what is happening, and how I think we could be a lot more effective in combating this toxicity, because that's the whole point. There's a very, very toxic narrative out there that's doing immense damage to our society, and the best remedy for that is the truth. And I can hear the naysayers already, well, they're not going to listen, or there's going to be many. That's fine. I don't care. I'll tell you what, it's never going to change if you don't say anything. So you might as well say something and let the cards fall where they may. But anyway, back to the point. In these discussions, it's almost always goes, as I started to break it down, if there's young men there that are expressing their dissatisfaction with things that, whatever it may be. Women are too promiscuous. They have too many choices on social media. They don't want to be homemakers. They don't want to be helpmeets, etc. And there's a lot of women that there's obviously the sector, the percentage that right away just at saying those things are quite triggered. But there's more and more that are also recognizing, hey, this hookup culture isn't working too well for us either. I would like to have a decent man. I don't really understand why it doesn't happen, etc. So there is kind of common ground there. But quite quickly in the discussion or in the debate, it usually is the ones that are dissatisfied, more so the men's side, will tend to promote returning to something along the lines of a more traditional paradigm of not participating so much in hookup culture or careerism. Maybe try to find somebody you can be monogamous with and have a family and kids at a younger age. And almost immediately, the females, usually, and once again, it's not always females, many men, Destiny comes to mind, a male feminist. I don't know if he calls himself a male feminist. I would call him a male feminist. His points definitely seem to be definitely feminist. Will usually retort, well, we things are different now. That's where they start. Things are different now. Women can make their own money. Women aren't going to do that anymore. Women, I've even heard repeatedly girls on panels and discussions that are in their young 20s. That means they would have been born, around the year 2000, talking about how their mothers couldn't work. Well, your mothers were probably born in 75 or 1980. What are you talking about? There was millions of women in the workforce as of the 1960s, even starting in the 1950s. But this is the point of what I'm getting to. I'm finally getting to the crux of the issue here. Please just bear with me. I won't go on forever. Try to limit this in about 8 or 9 more minutes of what I'm getting to. This, like I said, this is going to be my introduction, and then in the next videos I'll start presenting a lot of evidence to take the discussion and the points further, bit by bit, in small increments. And then when they take it there, it's basically, well, we were oppressed until about the 1960s. As I said, sometimes it's like the 1980s. And now we're not oppressed anymore, so we don't want to do that because that's all oppression. And the other side will say, well, something along the lines of, well, you're not oppressed anymore, and those things don't happen anymore. And it's not working out very good, so, let's kind of take it back there. And what really sticks on my craw listening to these discussions, and sometimes I'm like yelling at the screen, but once I understand they haven't seen what I've seen, and it took me a while to get there too, is that the discussion will never go anywhere if you concede that women were actually, quote unquote, oppressed up until, take whatever you want, it doesn't matter. Until they could vote until the 1920s. Most people, it seems, is somewhere around the 1960s. Now I know right there, a lot of people listening to this are, going to have going to be triggered, and even so many people, that are adjacent or basically on the same page, more or less even in the people questioning feminism and how badly out of kilter the dynamic has gotten between men and women, more or less what I've come to see is that the enveloping narrative that they accept is, well, of course, if women couldn't own property, if they couldn't vote, if they were kept out of certain careers, who would ever even attempt to defend that they weren't oppressed? Of course they were oppressed historically. You can basically sum it up like this, that pretty well everyone on all sides agreed that feminism was a necessary thing to fight this historical oppression of women until the oppression had an end put to it, completely put to it, had a complete end put to it around 40 to 50 years ago, let's say somewhere around the 1960s. And then both sides find common ground a lot of times that, but recently it's gotten batshit crazy, basically. There's consistent stats now for many years that in most countries in the West, I think that it's up to 80% of women will not say that they're feminists. But it doesn't mean that they don't believe in the historical oppression narrative. And that's very, very key, because that still is very damaging and very toxic to our society. That's not to say that everything was always peaches and cream. I come at things from a Christian point of view. I believe that we're fallen, we're sinful. You're always going to find abuses. You're always going to find a corruption throughout all of history, without a doubt. The point is, what is being sold, and whether you're aware of it or not, because many people don't really realize this is the accepted narrative that even they hold, and how important it is, in my opinion, if we want to progress, that you can't hold that narrative because it's not true, and you'll never get anywhere. The narrative that they hold is that all of human history, until about 40 to 50 years ago, was men in mass oppressing and conspiring against women simply because they were women. There's no other reasons that would be rational for the organization of their society as to why, for example, women couldn't vote, or to why they couldn't have property. And these are the minutiae that I'm going to get into of showing evidence that it's not oppression. It wasn't oppression. And this is why it's so important, because in these discussions, I'm going to go back now to several minutes in the conversation of these discussions that are happening now, when the young man, could be anybody, it's usually young men, are kind of maybe trying to push back on, what they're dissatisfied with, the dynamic that's going on. And then the girls are usually, but we're boss babes now. We make our own money now. You need to change your expectations. We're never going back to that. Okay? And this is the point, is that they quickly go back to, and I'm not promoting at all. I'm not promoting. This is going to have to be a series. I'm not promoting that we go back to that. That, quote unquote. That's a whole discussion in itself. What you realize, though, is that there is like a knee-jerk reaction that if we go back to that, we're going back to the oppression paradigm. And this can't be understated, of thousands of years. And once again, if you haven't really looked into it, and now that I've had years to look into it, of what they really teach, what they really write, the academics, the powers that be that are pushing this agenda, that is what they push, and it seeps into everything. That women have been oppressed for all of history. They finally stood up and battled to get a few crumbs, and now they can be strong and empowered, etc. And so you're sitting there as one of these young men and saying, well, things aren't working out too well. Let's take a look at it. Maybe we should be more like, the grandparents were, or whatever it may be. And with everybody having enveloped, we fought for decades and decades to get this, what we have now. We finally got free of the yokes of millennia of oppression. And now you're promoting what it sounds like to us. You're not saying, okay, we're going to take away your property rights. We're not saying we're going to take away your voting rights. We're not saying we're going to force you back into the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. But you're basically saying the paradigm when all of that stuff happened is what you want to return to. So why would any of these young ladies, if that's and once again, could be young men, but people that have bought into this paradigm, that it was all of total oppression, women were treated terrible for thousands of years, why would they listen to that? Because that is what they hear. It is what they hear. And these are some of the things that I'm going to cover in these series of videos that I'm going to do on it to show you that. Because I'm sure many, many people will listen to this and say, well, that isn't what they hear. And then they'll also say, oh, but that's also what a lot of the young men are promoting. That we, no, I don't believe that. I'm sure when there's millions of people, you might find some young men that are, literally, have some kind of oppression fantasy. But I don't believe the vast majority of young people. And when I say young people, I'm talking even people my age, over their 50s, but especially younger, that have been raised with, everybody working and, divorced families or whatnot. Nobody's entertaining that, you literally, go back to where it just wouldn't even be possible. It wouldn't make any sense. You just can't do it. I really think that the vast majority of those that are trying to push back and get kind of some semblance of normalcy and then use some of the examples from before of what worked are literally just trying to find something that works better. But what the other side hears isn't that at all, and it's very understandable. They hear you're talking about thousands of years of oppression, because they've literally, like in many, many of these narratives, as I've already said, people have literally been traumatized to believe that that is what went on, with all kinds of half-truths and lies, like I said before. So that's what I want to show here, the things that I saw that I thought that they were very life-changing to me. Because even as I became very cognizant looking back. As a young man, you kind of walked around with this male guilt a lot, because it would seem to, either come up through media like it does in so many things, or in school about, how terrible we used to be, and you almost kind of, walk around, I got to be careful, I've got these defective genes in me, because after all, it's only been a blink of an eye in all of history that, quote unquote, we started being nice to women and treating them properly. When you compare that to thousands of years, you're at a massive. You're not operating from a place of health as a young man. You're not doing the world any favors. You're not operating from a place of clarity and truth, because it's not. I've come to realize that it's just not. So things need to be balanced, and they become very, very unbalanced. And there literally has been a brutal demonization of men in general just for being men for a long time now. And I've said it many times, but I'll say it one more time because it can't be understressed, that the narrative is that men have been this way since the beginning of history. Oh, and one other small detail that's very important. And the only reason it stopped, it wasn't because men became to their senses. It's because women, if you do know, the true history of the organization of feminists with the suffragettes, they were viewed as a terrorist organization. They bombed places. Women had to organize in a militaristic fashion and actually have a terrorist campaign to get these men to behave. You see what I'm saying? They'd have a gun put to their head. And if not, the way the narrative goes, they'd just be a-raping and have these women chained to the stove and be beating them with no consequences. etc., etc. So you wouldn't, if that's the narrative you have in your head, which is the vast majority, trust me, I'm going to show the evidence. This is the evidence, this is the narrative. That probably sounds extreme to a lot of people. No, it's just that's what they say all the time, right? It's really just about equality. But it's not. If you look at the evidence of what they really teach, like I said, I'm going to show it, just bear with me. It's not. It's not just about equality. It is about that mental terrorizing of half of the population on the earth was terrorizing and enslaving the other half for all of history until they finally rose up and scraped a few rights in just the past few decades. And now all kinds of men are saying, hey, this isn't really working too good for us anymore, and they're making rumblings that maybe we want to go back there. And if you can't make a very solid case to say, because of course the woman's going to say, or the male feminists, just a ton of them as well, well, hell no. Hell no. We're not going back there. Those days were insane. So you have to say, no, they weren't. They weren't. You weren't lied to. We can't go back to 1850s. It's impossible. It's a completely changed world. Nobody's saying that. It's not what I'm saying. But the moral, the structure that came out of those days didn't come from a perverse morality. As I said, there was very, very rational reasons as to why things happened back then that had nothing to do with the systematic, organized, bigoted, hateful oppression of women. And that case needs to be made and needs to be mainstreamed. That we have been lied to, everybody, about what went on, what the dynamic was. It's got to be exposed. So I'm going to do the best I can here. This ain't my full-time job, it's a hobby. So, I'm not going to have hours and hours. I'm learning the video editing on the fly. I'm not a professional, so excuse me if it sometimes isn't as clear as it could be. Hopefully I'll get better as things go on. I'm going to present the evidence as I come across it, bit by bit. Here's a little bit more. Here's some food for thought. Just as things come to me, as I come across them, as I remember them, and put it out in the ether. See what people think. See if we can kind of get a little bit more balance into this. And I'd like to think that maybe a few people could find some of this material I'm going to put out and use it to edify their positions in these conversations. Because like I said, at the beginning of when I started to talk here, I've literally heard it said many times in these conversations when women say, yeah, but things are different now. Yeah, we make our own money. Yeah, we're now empowered. Yeah, we this and that, etc. And the rebuttal will be, but because we were oppressed. Women couldn't do this. And the rebuttal is, but you're not oppressed anymore. That's what guys will say. So you just admitted that they were oppressed. And I understand that the guys saying it, they don't realize really what they're admitting to, how damning it is. And I think these are things that have been absorbed on a very deep level. It's not conscious. But what really goes on, the dynamic that goes on, is that he just admitted to men were diabolical for all of history. And she's hearing on the other side there that you want to go back to that diabolatry. So you're not you can't advance. You can't. You're not going to be able to find any common ground until that is that toxicity is exposed and taken away. Where you can actually have evidence and say, look, no, that wasn't the case at all. This is what we're talking about. This is how we need to find some common ground. But anyway, I feel like I'm starting to kind of go in circles now. I hope that came across somewhat clear. I'll probably listen back to it, have some friends listen to it. Hopefully this will be my final take, and I'll start working on the evidence here, and we'll take it from there. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.